Nearly there. Okay, we're live. Amazing. Hello and welcome to Kirtan London, Journey to Joy. This is episode 6 with your hosts. Today it's myself, Madhva Anderson, and we're joined by a very, very special guest. Chintamani, who normally does the show with me, she's not feeling well, so we can send her some love, some positive vibes. But a very good friend of mine and an incredible scholar of the Bhakti tradition agreed to join me and fill in for Chintamani today and share some knowledge with us, his knowledge of the Gita. It's my good friend Jaya Jagannath, who is a scholar. I don't know what else to call him. He's a funny dude. He cracks jokes. When he's cracking them, he knows he's doing it, and sometimes he doesn't, and he's still hilarious. But that's not the real thing that he's known for. He's known for his large mind. He tends to attract groups of people to him for his vast philosophical, deep introspective understanding of specifically the bhakti-yoga texts. He runs a couple of groups, reading groups. He runs his own podcast as well. He co-hosts with another wonderful person, another good friend. And I'm personally extremely grateful to have him on. Jaya Jagannath, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. You can send some positive vibes to me also, because I'm a little under the weather and some allergy.
So. Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that. Thank you for coming on despite not feeling 100%, dude.
No problem. I hope it just the not feeling 100% part doesn't come out in the podcast in the form of some grumpiness, as I mentioned to you earlier.
We were talking earlier. That's why I was talking about Jai's humor. He was sharing somehow or other. He has this ability to be telling me he's grumpy, and he's still making me laugh. So it's a special thing that Jai has.
Okay, no pressure.
Wonderful. So you know how we do here. If any of you have been watching the first 5 episodes, firstly, thank you very much. Thank you for joining us on this journey of going through the Bhagavad Gita. But as you know, we always start with an invocation, which is just a prayer. It's a grounding experience, and it's a prayer that we make before any spiritual endeavor. And we're asking for blessings from our teachers in our lineage who have given us these sacred teachings, asking for their blessings that we may really take something from this. And there's another good reason we do invocations, and it slipped my mind. The blessings of our teachers, gratitude to our teachers as well. Anything else, Jai, before I take it away? You'd like to share anything new on invocations that I don't normally say?
Usually there are obstacles to the completion of a work or completion of a presentation. Many obstacles come up, internal and external. So invocations are done to remove those obstacles. And also an invocation is done so that one can kind of circumvent the problems that ego presents in making a, quote, like a pure presentation or a transparent presentation. And so that I can be an instrument of a higher reality instead of getting in the way with my own ego. An invocation is also performed to allow yourself to be empowered as an instrument. And these are some other ideas that come up there.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. On that note, let me start with the invocation, just briefly. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pastatya Deshatarine Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Jai. Okay, so episode 6. So until now, Jaya, I know we've spoken, I told you what we've done already, but let me do a little recap for our listeners. In case you're joining for the first time today, in our first 5 episodes, we covered a basic overview of what the Gita is, some context about where it was spoken in the great story, the Mahabharata, and we've covered, as best as we can, chapters 1 and 2, myself and Chintamani. And so we wrapped up the last episode, finishing the last section of verses in chapter 2. And now we're starting chapter 3, which is titled Karma Yoga. I just want to say, maybe it's not coincidence, because I've been in this section of book regularly, so maybe the pages are used to being open there, but I just randomly opened the book as I was saying it, and I made it perfectly to chapter 3, Karma Yoga. So kudos to myself there.
Congratulations.
Krishna. So that's what we're doing. We're here to look at least start chapter 3. You know, we started this podcast, and for some reason I had this idea that we should be covering ground. We should be moving quickly through what we're reading. And what I started to feel, what both me and Chintamani started to feel, was an inability to do that and to do justice to the service that we're trying to do here. We found that there's so much wisdom within each small section, you could say every word of the Gita, that it felt like we were doing an injustice to this service, to ourselves, because this podcast is for our listeners, but it's also for ourselves to go deeper, and of course to our listeners. And so we actually reflected, and we thought we can slow it down. So there's no real quota on how much of chapter 3 we want to get through today, but we just maybe cover an overview. Jai really is a scholar on these texts, and so I'll be asking lots of questions to Jai, I think, today. It's a really wonderful opportunity for us to have you with us today. And so on that note, maybe I'll pass it to you, and you can kick us off with maybe an overview of chapter 3, what we're looking at, and then we can dive into some of the points in more detail.
Oh, okay. So the chapter 3 is called Karma Yoga. The idea of Karma Yoga is, how does one reconcile one's desire for, let's say, spiritual development? How does one reconcile that with the need for like social engagement, which is a question that comes up a lot in the sort of contemporary political times of the day. And especially this question is brought to a lot of spiritualists. How do they reconcile their desire for spiritual, let's say, advancement with the sort of awareness of an obligation to the social world around them? And as you will discover, at least some of us discovered this when we joined monasteries. I joined the monastery when I was 18. And these two worlds seem to be at odds with each other, the outer and the inner world. So much so that when you decide to like pursue spiritual life, it's like got to be all or nothing. And so you enter into the spiritual world, and you just kind of forego the responsibilities of the outer world, like the social world, responsibilities to your parents, you know, obligations for being educated and contributing to the society in various helpful ways. You kind of eschew all those responsibilities, and of course you're justified in your thinking at the time because you're fully dedicated to the pursuit of spirit. And often it can be seen that those who are interested in spiritual life but involved with the outer world, by dint of circumstances or for whatever other reasons they're involved with the outer world, they often tend to express a sort of difficulty in spirituality because of their involvement with the outer world. You know, if they have to meet obligations to work and to family and to this and to that, then their pursuit for the inner life gets on the back burner.
Mm-hmm.
So are these two worlds really at odds with each other? That's kind of it's a question for every age. And it comes up here also in the very outset of the Bhagavad Gita. Are these two really at odds with each other? The outer obligations to the outer world and the desire for inner evolution, are they really at odds with one another? Now, I know when, particularly in our modern contemporary times, you know, the two are often conflated. In other words, if you're like socially woke and engaged, that is itself spirituality, you know, and so they kind of solve the issue just by conflating the two. So that's kind of one approach to it. And then there's perhaps a more nuanced approach that do see the two worlds as different worlds, but that they don't need to be at odds with one another. There's a way they can be reconciled to each other, so much so that the obligation to the outer world is met whilst also making advancement in your inner life. So those are kind of like two approaches. And as I understand chapter 3 Bhagavad Gita, or the topic of karma yoga, which is the main thrust of the Gita's first 6 chapters. The first 6 chapters, the main thrust is Krishna's giving teachings on karma yoga. He also brings up topics like Gyan Yoga, kind of indirectly, which is an interesting point. He doesn't directly talk about Gyan Yoga in these first 6 chapters.
So what is Gyan Yoga for our listeners?
Yeah, in short, you have karma yoga. We're just going to keep it with simple language right now. It's like the yoga of action. And as I'm saying, the yoga of action here means meeting obligations to the external world while also making advancement in your inner world. That's the basic idea of
Karma
yoga. Then this Gyan yoga, you can call it yoga here, is generally just means like as path or a means to a certain enlightened end. And so the Gyan path, Gyan yoga, is a path of, Gyan means knowledge here, or the word Jnana also can mean consciousness or awareness. And the path of knowledge, in terms of what it looks like, generally is a retreat from the world. So like joining a monastery, for example, and you're dedicating all your time to, let's say, study of sacred texts that deals with spiritual subject matter. They call this as the path of knowledge. In terms of what it looks like, it involves a strong element of renunciation from the material world, a kind of retreat from the outer world to a monastery. Dhyan yoga means a path of meditation. These two, Dhyan yoga, are usually kind of taken together, but it also involves like a retreat from the outer world, maybe some practice of yogic asceticism in some forest or something. But the basic idea is that those paths kind of emphasize a sort of retreat from the outer world and a full focus on just spiritual life without the encumbrance of the sort of social obligations of the world. And then you have, like, later on, we'll discover in the middle 6 chapters, this sort of bhakti-yoga path, or the path of devotion. So Krishna, in the first 6 chapters of the Gita, which are, like, people say Gita is famous, even among secular audiences, Gita is famous, but it's usually famous for these first 6 chapters because there's more talk of like self-development, psychology. You get a lot of that in the first 6 chapters. That middle 6 chapters people don't like too much because it's like a lot of God talk there. And, you know, that one is not as appealing to them. Krishna is speaking about his glories and how you should surrender to him and all that. It's not as appealing, but these first 6 chapters are popular. And the main thrust of these first 6 chapters is the karma yoga topic. Although chapter 4 has a different name, chapter 5 has a slightly different name. Chapter 6 also has a different name, but the main thrust of the whole presentation is karma yoga. So it's like an important thing to understand. And again, karma yoga is trying to understand how my desire for inner evolution can be reconciled to my obligations to the outer world. In the contemporary times, this is a very good question. particularly for those who are, socially sensitive or socially awake and feel they need to do their part in the various social ills of the world. But they also have a sense of the need for, like, I need to get myself together too, if I'm really going to be of ultimate and sustainable help to the outer world. So there are a lot of people who will be thinking about this sort of dichotomy that comes up. And so the first two verses of the chapter is Arjuna asking a question precisely about this. And in chapter 2, he hears Krishna kind of speaking about two threads of thought, so to speak. One thread of thought, as Arjuna's language in the first verse of the Gita, chapter 3 here, is the thread of like intelligence, buddhi. You talked about buddhi and the way that he's understood, because in the chapter 2, Krishna has talked about bhakti-yoga.
Yeah.
So the yoga of intelligence, or the path of intelligence. And the way Arjuna has understood this is a retreat from the outer world. So he's asking Krishna, you said that bhakti-yoga is better than karma, but you want to engage me in this ghastly karma. And for him, ghastly karma here means fighting in a war, which is ghastly. And it's like, literally, it's like very bloody work. So if intelligence is superior to this engagement in ghastly work, karma, in this case, killing a lot of people, like a lot, not like one or two, but a lot of people, then how come you're trying to engage me in this work? Like you've made that case in the last chapter, but you've also told me to engage in this ghastly work. So this seems like, I think the word that was being used is equivocal. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing that right.
Equivocal.
Okay, so
you got it, bro.
You're giving double talk here. You're giving double talk. This doesn't make sense to me. And so I need you to reconcile these two understandings. Now, what's interesting about Arjuna's doubt is that it is true that Krishna did speak about bhakti-yoga, and he did, as he will also later, place bhakti-yoga in a superior position than like a retreat from the world. But Arjuna hasn't understood it in that way because he had a particular understanding of things, which he basically imposed onto what he was hearing from Krishna. This is a defect that's known as pramada in Sanskrit. There are 4 defects that afflict humans, according to, this is basically Vedic epistemological cornerstone. This idea that humans are afflicted with 4 types of defects. In short, they're called as illusion, Brahma, pramada, which means inattention, and I'm going to elaborate on pramada a little bit here because it fits the context. And then karanapatava, which means like in limitation and defect of the senses. And vipralipsa. Vipralipsa means cheating propensity. But cheating propensity here doesn't mean like your tendency to cheat others, because it's in the context of epistemology. Epistemology means how you know what you know. Which is a really good question, because people, especially now on social media, everyone just be mouthing off so many, quote, facts. And if you ask people this simple question, how do you know what you know? Like, from where you're picking that up, you start to see how a lot of things we share, it's like kind of like bluffing. Or we'll share something like, we'll find some article that we know supports the line of thought that we're thinking. Without even reading the article, we'll just like share it, see, and then we'll say, just see the science. Like, bro, you didn't even read the article, did you?
This is so common, so common.
So this is called as vipralipsa. I think in perhaps more up-to-date term, we might call it as confirmation bias. So in any case, because of these 4 defects, it's very hard to understand practically anything. It's very hard to come to a consensus even about like basic stuff. Like, honestly, I'm just using this as an example. So we're not going to go down this thread. It's just as an example. But with the whole pandemic, there's like people who say there's a pandemic. There's a whole bunch of people who think that it's fake. and they're like at each other's throats in the sort of digital universe. They're at each other. And everyone seems to have really good evidence for the position that they're taking. And either side of the party accuses the other side of being like misinformed, having ill intent, like all the same arguments they throw at one another. I personally find it kind of interesting and funny. And everyone's like obviously and self-evidently right. But when it comes to trying to establish the veracity of their particular position, it's not so easy. And I'm not saying there isn't actually a truth behind this or that, but I'm just saying when it comes to even material things, because of these four defects, it makes it really difficult to establish the veracity of any position, even materially speaking. What then to speak of like a spiritual domain, which is altogether beyond the senses and, conscious and subtle. Anyway, so as it relates to Arjuna's understanding here, because that's what we're talking about in these first two verses, he's having a misunderstanding of Krishna's presentation of the subject matter in chapter 2 because of the pramada defect. So the word pramada literally means inattention. Like you'll have, like in the devotional realm, we have this 10 offenses to the holy name. And then you have like this 11th offense, which is actually translated as api pramadaha. And it is also an offense to be pramad, to have inattention when chanting. So inattention takes place when your senses are contacting an object. For example, the sense of sight is there, and then the object for the sense of sight is form. It sees different forms, right? So when your sense contacts an object, only when your mind is focused on that particular sense, when it's contacting the object, are you able to get all the information that sense is giving to you on a particular thing that it's contacting. But if your mind is distracted, that is called pramadaha, inattention. So sometimes you're like maybe looking at, here's a good example, like you're eating something, but you're in anxiety. So you don't actually taste the food, right? Maybe we have experience of this, you're depressed or you're in anxiety. So even though you're eating, so the tongue is a sense, right? Contacting the sense object, let's say tasty foodstuffs. But you don't really taste it because your mind is distracted by anxiety or by depression and so on. That's called pramada. So that is one sense of the word pramada. And the other sense of the word pramada, as it applies to these first two verses of Gita, is when you have basically an a priori conclusion about a particular subject matter. So that a priori conclusion determines what you will see, actually. In other words, you're not going into the situation like completely unbiased and like, I just want to see wherever the truth leads me. Like everyone says that, but they're completely fake. Most of us, even if we think we mean that, it's really hard to mean that in authenticity because we have these four defects. So basically you have a certain conclusion about something, and that conclusion determines what it is that it basically sets the limits of your perception. And it determines how you will interpret even the facts that come before you. So, for example, in America, as I'm sure you guys have been watching the stool show that is, the United States of America right now. And one of the big things that comes up here is like racism, right? Everyone's like, racism is like this huge behemoth. It's really a problem. I have my own opinions about that, but it's like really in the psyche of the people at large. And so when they hear about, let's say like a shooting, like a cop shooting, they already believe that, the cops are racist. They're like hunting, people of color down. And so you have a fact like the cop shot, like, let's say a person of color. That's a fact. But what are facts without interpretation, right? Every fact is interpreted, right? Every fact is interpreted. So you already have the conclusion that the country is racist and that the police department is racist. So when you hear a fact like the cop shot someone, then you're like, it's because he's racist. That means because your paradigm of thinking already set the parameters of how something is to be interpreted. You're not going into it as an unbiased person. So similarly, now suppose you get other information like this person of color happened to be attacking the cops. He happened to have a gun. He happened to try to shoot them. Then it's like, oh, wait, that kind of like makes it a little bit more nuanced in that particular perspective that you're providing. But because you already have a commitment to a way of seeing things a priori. So that means before you've really come to know all the facts, that determines how you interpret something, right? So Arjuna is having the same problem. He basically understands that to be intelligent is a retreat from the world of social obligation.
Right.
And so he's interpreted all that he's heard in chapter 2 in light of his own understanding. This is called pramadaha.
Yeah, we spoke about this actually.
Really?
We spoke about this. We were saying how Arjuna, he's got his own ulterior motives right now. And so when he's hearing Krishna, plus Krishna does say a lot in chapter 2. Chapter 2 is called the Gita summarized. So Krishna says a lot. But what Arjuna does is he picks out the bits that he wants, and then he pokes there a bit more, and that's where his questions come. So we spoke about this point. This what's the Sanskrit word?
The word is pramad.
Pramad. Yeah. Right. So this pramad in Arjuna, and then this kind of poking directive questions to say, well, yeah, but I want to escape the battle. So let me ask a question directed to navigate and get that kind of answer out of you.
Right. I mean, to be fair, it's a lot of these things happen unconsciously.
Of course.
These processes are unconscious.
Again, we clarify Arjuna is what someone on the spiritual path might call a self-realized soul. He's not a deluded soul, just to clarify for everyone listening, because sometimes these people who take on roles in these pastimes, they can take a bit of rap. They don't always look so intelligent, but Arjuna really is a self-realized soul. But in the context of the Gita, it's almost like he's playing a role for the greater good of humanity. Just to put that out there, caveat.
Yes. So yeah, these processes are wholly unconscious for the most part. Even when they're pointed out, we don't notice them. That's how subtle and kind of profound the grip of these defects are. So anyway, he's understood Krishna's message in chapter 2 in a certain way that requires clarification for his way of understanding. So Krishna wants to clarify in the rest of the chapter. Like what is he actually speaking about? So I just gave a little overview of the first 2 verses.
That was just 1 and 2, huh?
That was just 1 and 2. Just the question determining like this sort of tension between outer and inner world, and the two seem to be at odds. Can they be reconciled to each other?
Amazing. One of the things I love about when you dissect spiritual knowledge is you have a unique ability to make it very relevant. I like how you bring in the context of the modern world, and a lot of the modern world is social media. Realistically, a lot of social interaction happens there.
Yes.
Just the media in general, and you always seem to make this ancient wisdom so relevant to today's day and age. I really appreciate that. I remember the first time I was hearing you talk and seeing you draw those contrasts. It was almost a new way of analyzing, inspecting the information at hand. I've become used to it now, and I appreciate it a lot.
Oh, well,
so
thank you.
Maybe I can, because I feel like you're a good person. I have some thoughts on this and some questions. So maybe I can present to you in a very basic and shorthand format, my understanding of what's going on, and then present some questions about that. See how you feel about that. So my understanding so far is that Krishna will now go on to tell Arjuna that he should engage. He should engage, because you gave this distinction between withdrawal, perhaps jnana yoga, buddhi yoga, and karma yoga, which is in action. It's yoga in action. Engagement. It's engaged yoga with the world. And so Krishna is telling Arjuna, actually, it's your duty to be engaged. Your duty is not to withdraw. And so this strikes me as something which is contrary to other spiritual beliefs, other spiritual paths, and what might be a commonly assumed ideas about spirituality. I have a friend, to give some context, I have a friend who joined a bhakti temple. He's an older person. He's probably now in his 50s, but we were friends. He went to the same temple that I went to growing up. He was a resident monk there. And he told me laughingly one time, we used to be in the same drama group at the temple. We'd perform these spiritual acts and dramas together. And he told me that when he joined the temple monastery, he expected it to be, you could say, Buddhist in style, just very tranquil. Lots of seclusion, lots of meditation, lots of quietening the mind, lots of retreating from the world, sitting in a quiet space alone with your mind. And it was the complete opposite. He was never busier. And he said it laughingly. And and this is just him in a temple. Now imagine I'm being told as a young male who's not monastic, who doesn't live in a temple, hasn't got that internal navigation set up for that lifestyle. My internal navigation, I'm married, I work, and I'm being told this is the right thing for me to do, where I'm at, based on my psychophysical apparatus. That's a term I picked up from Jaya Jagannath, by the way. And my question around now, there's the reasoning for this instruction. Would that be a fair? You're good with what I'm saying so far?
I think so.
Okay. So the reasoning given for this is that we can never be inactive in reality. We might think we're being inactive. We might think we're withdrawing from the world. We might think that we're sitting under a tree somewhere meditating and we're so renounced and spiritual, but we take our mind everywhere. And and our mind is never inactive. And so it's a little bit like, I compare it in my mind to the rabbit, the tortoise and the hare. Go slow for good flow. To keep moving. Sorry, that maybe is not a great way to put it. Slow and steady wins the race. That to move forward realistically on a spiritual path, to falsely renounce and withdraw from the world, is not going to win you the race long term. Obviously, the race is against yourself. It's not against anyone else, but that's the point. False renunciation is long term going to damage your spiritual progress versus being real to where you are and being engaged and active, but then dovetailing that activity to spiritual service, because our minds are active and we need activity. So that's why it's the long game. Say, realistically, do what's right for you according to your psychophysical apparatus in this moment. There's a process for you to progressively develop your spiritual character, your inner sacred space, in a way which is going to be also fulfilling for your material needs. So therefore you can really make genuine progress. And that's the instruction that I understand, that is karma yoga.
Yeah, so, that's Krishna's first argument. If you want to see it as an argument, Arjuna is asked his question in the first two verses. Yeah. And then in verses 3 through 8, or you can go up to 9 also, Krishna kind of gives his first argument. Then in verse 10 through 16, gives a second argument. And then in verse 17 through 26, he gives a third argument. An argument in favor of performing duty. So Krishna in chapter 2, this famous verse, well, it's famous in India, and that too only the first line. Karmaneva adhikarasya, this verse is very popular in India. You have the right to your duty. Usually Indian parents use this as a cudgel against their children to do whatever they want them to do. In any case, karmani eva adhikaraste. So this is Krishna saying you certainly have adhikara for karma. So this word adhikara means like eligibility or qualification. And it comes up in the very first statement of Krishna here in chapter 3. If you go to 3:3 of the chapter, so Krishna says it's true that he previously spoke about two types of nishta, dvividha nishta, lokesmen dvividha nishta. So this word nishta means like stability or like steadiness. And it conveys a sense of adhikar or eligibility. And the idea here is that you'll be able to be stable in something that you have qualification for. And conversely, you can't be stable in that which you don't have qualification for, right?
Mm-hmm.
Later on in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna will use these two terms together when he's describing what is virtue and what is vice. And he says, Sway sway adhikaraya nishta saguna parikirtita, that virtue is to be steady according to your qualification. And vice is just the opposite. Viparya is just the opposite, which means you're trying to be steady in that which you don't have qualification for.
Oh, wow. Virtue and vice. And that's how,
Yes.
wow, that's really interesting.
That's how Krishna actually, this statement comes up twice in the Bhagavad Gita. I know once in the beginning of the 21st chapter of the 11th canto, and one other place, I don't remember the other location. But he says the statement twice, so it seems that it's an important one to him. That steadiness or virtue is being steady according to your qualification. And vice is just the opposite, which means trying to be steady in that which you're not qualified for. Later on in this chapter 3, he'll make a similar statement in 335, that better you do your duty, even if you don't do it well, than to try to do someone else's duty, even though you think you do it perfectly. Because destruction comes to one who tries to develop steadiness in something which he's unqualified for. So yeah, the idea here is that now this maybe tickles our sense of entitlement that a lot of our generation seems to suffer from acutely, that you can just do and be whatever you want.
Millennials, yeah.
And then you have like Krishna saying like, no. Like, you know that, I don't know if you know this meme with Bugs Bunny with his lips poked out and it just says no coming out.
Yeah.
I need to make a meme of that. So we have this idea, there's this entitlement in our generations. I attribute it to not getting enough butt whoopings growing up, which I got plenty of. So I'm not like super duper entitled, but I'm still a millennial. So I have a little entitlement there. And it's just kind of this, I mean, it's the culture has bred into us the idea that you can like do and be whatever you want. And it's like,
it's not true.
It's not true.
It's not true. I've actually had to learn that lesson the hard way.
Who hasn't had to learn that lesson the hard way?
I wanted to be a millionaire by now.
Now working out.
That's kind of true in one sense, actually, on that point about being a really thrifty moneymaker.
It's hard for us to accept entitled as we tend to be these days, but there's a sense that you have a qualification for something,
right?
Adhikara. This word adhikara is is a pretty big word that comes up in Sanskrit literatures. There's this concept of adhikar bheda. The word bheda means different, so adhikar bheda means a difference in adhikar. So according to your adhikar, you're supposed to be given training. So the idea, if you think about it, like I'm just using old school sort of quote Vedic terminology in terms of how they thought of the social body. There was like an intellectual class, there was a martial class, there was an agrarian class, a business class, and there was like a laborer class. So according to your class, you have a different adhikar, and you will receive training according to your adhikar. Not that everyone had to learn the same exact thing for 18 years, which is impractical because of adhikar beta, because we have a difference in adhikar. Like I'm traumatized. Middle school was the most traumatizing period for me. I always joke that I wouldn't want to take rebirth again in the material world just to avoid middle school, because middle school was extremely traumatizing. And part of the trauma of it, there were many traumas, but part of the trauma of it was like being in classes either that you yourself weren't really qualified for. And so there was a tendency to like lash out and act out in those classes because you just couldn't get your head around the material because you didn't have adhikar for it. Or like being one of the students who had to be tormented in those classes by those who didn't have adhikar for those classes. Throwing spitballs, acting a fool, clowning. And it's just like a huge trauma in my head. But later on, when I came to Gita, I was like, okay, I get it now. We were all pushed into like this one cookie cutter sort of model, which didn't work because of Adhikar Beta. We have a difference in Adhikar. So Krishna's opening statement in chapter 3 is this, that yes, I talked about 2 types of nishta, and i.e. 2 types of Adhikar. And he already mentioned to Arjuna in chapter 2 what he had Adhikar for. He didn't say you have Adhikar for the path of retreat from the world, but you have Adhikar for karma, this sort of karma Adhikar. He uses the language here in 3.3. Well, what are those 2 nishtas? He says Jnana Yogena, Sankhyanam, and Karma Yogena Yoginam. So I talked about a qualification for Gyan Yoga, which we mentioned earlier, and a qualification for Karma Yoga. So you should do what you have qualification for, because then you'll be successful, and then you'll be progressive. But if you try to do that which you don't have Adhikar for, you'll create disturbance. So anyway, yeah, amplifying your understanding is very much what I think I'm understanding from Gita also in this passage.
Okay, amazing. I'm glad we're on the same page.
So I don't know if you have any further thoughts on that. I mean, I'm just looking at 3.3.
I had a question on it. So my question is this, which is, in my own life, I see how I almost doubt the veracity. Veracity means truthfulness. The veracity of this point, I have a doubt about it.
Yeah.
Which is that it seems like to be engaged in this world means, for example, the corporate world. You might think in the working world, if you're trying to be successful work-wise, it's a very dog-eat-dog world. It can be. The strong win. You've got to, shoulder muscle your way to the top, or just being engaged in the world. There are so many risks that are counterproductive to spiritual life. As young men associating with lots of young women out in the world, or as young women associating with lots of young men out in the world, with trying to navigate being financially successful and having your energy, the energy of your mind, pulled into these different directions. There's so many, it feels to me that there's so many counterproductive pitfalls to spiritual life that are potential things that you might encounter that could cause problems for you trying to pursue spirituality. So the idea of withdrawing from these external circumstances seems, from one angle, more productive, more intuitive. So I guess in one sense, the question is kind of answered, that what's my adhikar? What's my ability? What's my internal ability, nature, propensity to withdraw? Maybe it's just that. Maybe that's the answer, that I don't have the ability to withdraw healthily. And so my path is to just navigate these different obstacles that are there. And you see the question?
Yeah, definitely. I think, first of all, it's only feasible, it seems more feasible to withdraw sort of line of thought, I think, exists primarily in the abstract world. In the practical world, is not more feasible. At least, in other words, a lot of the whole discussion of adhikar, I mean, that part could be broken down a little bit more. But one of the main elements about having, qualification for work or qualification for withdrawal deals with the nature of your mind at a particular stage of your own development. In other words, they use this word. This word is used in Sanskrit literature as antakarna. The word antakarna means the inner instrument. And it refers to your mind, basically, your mind, your intellect, your ego. This is known as the antakarna, or the inner instrument. Sometimes we also call it as the subtle body or the cognitive body, in contradistinction with the gross physical body. There's a cognitive body. You can say that's within the gross physical body. And the Gita's first 6 chapters basically wants to speak about the purification of the antakarna, of the inner instrument. In other words, you can imagine like an inner instrument that's a little bit dull because it's been too much, like a knife. If a knife has been used a lot, then it's a little bit dull. You need to sharpen it a little bit, right? So you can imagine an inner instrument that's a little bit dull because of, well, in the context of the Gita's sort of metaphysics, engagement with enjoyment. Like you've engaged with the sensual enjoyment for a long time. So the antakarana is a little bit dull, not so sharp. I mean, for example, maybe I shouldn't give this example. For example, they
do it. Safe space, bro. Safe space.
Well, I heard about this. I don't have the study on me, but they did some study where they show men specifically taking a test, like when they were by themselves, and then taking a test sitting next to a beautiful woman. And apparently the results show that they did significantly worse when they were sitting next to a beautiful woman because they were distracted. You know, I think that should be obvious. Anyway, I don't want to get canceled for saying something like that, but that's just an example.
Well, I mean, didn't sound offensive, anything you said to me. It's a reality of the world that we live in.
Bro, we live in 2021. People get offended over much less.
This is so true, man. And I'm not even, I notice it in certain circles more than others, but recently the circles I've been in, I've seen some heavy PC culture.
Yeah.
And it is what it is, and I get it, and I'm having to learn to navigate my speech and navigate my...
Which means shut up. Okay, got it.
Just shut up, basically. Just keep my mouth shut. No, I have to talk. It's in circles where I'm it's work, and I have to talk and I have to engage. And it's just being socially aware. It's sad in a sense because so many things have become stigmatized and made you scary. It's almost scary to say anything because of...
Like... Hey, I'm a young guy, so if a beautiful girl is sitting next to me, I get a little distracted. Sorry.
But that's why I say, at least for myself, I know myself in Chintamani, and actually I want to shout out Kirtan London right now. And Kirtan London's general, we call it family. It's the Kirtan London family. It's just a group of incredibly wonderful people. So that's why I say safe space, safe space. Obviously, we put this out into the world, and you can't control who ultimately listens to these things and who may or may not take offense, but at least...
let's just take it for granted. Like, whether you believe in this or not, let's take it for granted. This is just, you can use it as an abstract idea. There's a young guy, he gets distracted if a beautiful girl is near him. Let's just take it for granted that happens.
Okay, yeah, so good, I'm with you.
So the idea here is that when your senses are engaged with their objects too much, your inner instrument becomes a little bit dull. In the same way that these guys became a little bit dull when they were sitting next to beautiful women. So in order to purify the inner instrument, there's a way to engage your senses in a way that it purifies the inner instrument so that it becomes more sharp. And then when it becomes sharp, you have a way to engage with the world in a spirit of detachment. And if you do that, for a while, then you may develop adhikar for total withdrawal from the world also. So the idea here is that what I'm trying to develop here is this idea that you were saying, well, it's a lot of things that people could be doing out here that's like a little bit crazy, and that makes it seem more feasible to withdraw because there's so many crazy things people are doing for work, and better they withdraw. But I said that only really makes sense when you're talking about it abstractly. But when you're having to actually deal with like withdrawing, then you see that most people, let's bring it down home. Most of us won't do that well if we had that much free time on our hand. Like
true.
People be talking about during 2020, one of the most I saw practically all spiritual groups of spiritual minded people. They were like, if you can't go outside, go inside. And I was like, F all that. I'm not trying to go inside, dude. Inside is nasty.
It's ugly.
It's like not talking about go inside like it's like a beautiful experience. I'm like, ain't nothing beautiful about that. What y'all talking about go inside? I'm trying to go inside.
I'm going to stay external as long as I can.
As long as possible. And fact of the matter is like we say that in jest, but the facts, at least I don't know about UK or Spain or whatever, but in the US, the stats were looking really ghastly for the sort of things that were going on when people were locked down. I mean,
Yeah, it's the same everywhere. Same here, same in Spain, same everywhere.
Yeah, it's not talked about too much or brought into our psyche because it feels like they want to keep us perpetually locked down. Anyway, that's neither here or there.
Topic for another discussion. Oh yeah.
But what that doesn't get brought up to the psyche, like how many people didn't do well with that extra bit of free time or that extra bit of wiggle room. So the point is that I'm making is that the idea of, well, this work seems really problematic, therefore better to withdraw, that only really works on an abstract level. When it comes to the rubber hitting the road, so to speak, one realizes that, okay, I need to work just to manage these psychological energies that I would not be able to manage in a healthy way if it weren't for work. I like to also add here that I do find an important distinction needs to be made between work and finances. And I do tend to think that these two become conflated in the contemporary world.
Yeah.
Because, for a whole set of reasons, but there's like work that is meaningful for a person according to the sort of nature that they have. And then there's finances. I feel that the whole preoccupation with like money and finances has kind of co-opted is the word I'm looking for, or usurped the need for meaningful work. So people they're like interested in a sort of job if it pays X, Y, and Z amount of money, because I need X amount of Z, X, Y, Z amount of money to survive. Whereas, and at least the sense that I get from the Gita is like, you just do meaningful work according to your nature. And if you find satisfaction at work, then you're good to go. And provided you can maintain yourself, like you need to make sure that you're able to maintain yourself, you should be happy with that. Like, in other words, this is going to be a really strong statement. In the old world, I don't know if it really mattered if you were poor or like lower middle class. I feel like our generation gets really concerned about that. Like there's like some sort of stigma around being poor. Like even to say that I'm poor, there's like a stigma around it. Like you don't want to
don't say that.
Like, yeah,
don't bring that on yourself.
You're rich in character and like, yeah, I get all that, but I'm like practically poor.
No, but manifest. You can manifest it.
Okay, maybe I can manifest, but until I manifest, I'm poor. But like, wrong with?
I'm not dissing people saying that, by the way. That might be true. I don't know enough.
Look at you. You already trained out how to be PC.
It's true. It might be true. I genuinely don't know enough.
My question is, what's wrong with being poor? If you have meaningful work that helps you to maintain your bare minimum for survival.
We do associate money with success, money with work, and money is not the key to happiness. And now you see, even with interviews with Jay Shetty and Will Smith, and Will is talking very, very openly about these things. Before we had Jim Carrey talking very openly about these things. I wish everyone achieved everything they ever wanted materially, just so they can know that's not what makes them happy. It's not
right. So that distinction should be made. That when Krishna in the Gita, he's going to be advocating for doing meaningful work in such a way that you meet a certain obligation to your outer world while simultaneously making spiritual advancement insight. But that work doesn't necessarily or even at all translate into like financial like success or dominance. It just means work that is meaningful to you according to your nature. And just getting comfortable with that sort of concept is a hard one, I think, for our generation also.
There's a couple points here that I feel like I was hearing you pull out that I wanted to go deeper on. So I'm gonna let me think. Where do I start here? Because you said a few, and I was thinking of a few things. Okay, just on this topic, then, to stay here for a moment. So I had to grapple with this particular point in my own life. I mentioned earlier about this desire for wealth, and this particular exact thing. In fact, for many years of my life, I was very, very focused on work, and in fact, so much so that I was very little, almost zero energy. I had zero energy left over in my day to focus on spiritual practice because I was very focused about work. I was always thinking about how can I make more money, whether it's a little side hustle, whether it's my job, whether it's overtime. And then so much so that my spare time, I was exhausted and I wanted to chill and do nothing. And I had this mentality that I really wanted to make more money. And one of the things that is a part of this Vedic system, the wisdom from the East, we're dissecting the ultimate wisdom from the East right now, which is the spiritual literature. But there are other aspects of this wisdom, and one of those things is astrology. Astrology is also a science. So anyway, just to give some context, I had a chart reading done while I was in India. I've had a few done in my life, and the gentleman told me at the time, because you can ask certain questions and like that, and my question was about business and money. That was where my mind and heart was at. And he told me, you don't worry about those things, Madhva. Don't invest your energy there. It's not for you. You just worry about doing what you love. That will be good for you in this life. Now, out of context, maybe that just sounds like generic, magazine wisdom. But in context of my personal emotions, I was actually upset with the guy.
Sure.
And I came away from that thinking, freaking, I hate astrology. Astrology is stupid. Fake. It's useless. Guy doesn't know what he's talking about. Who's he to tell me that? Not to, because I was in that mindset of make money, and it's taken. Me and Sundari, my wife, we traveled for a few years, and across that time, I had so many nice engagements with spiritual teachers, peers, friends, and time to reflect and think. I quit my job when we were traveling, and it was a sabbatical. It really was. It was time to go inside.
Yes.
So I eventually came to the realization I came to the place where I found some peace with that. This idea that what's my adhikar? What is my internal sat-nav setup? What is my nature in this life according to my body, my mind? And just accepting that happiness doesn't equate to money. Happiness is doing fulfilled work. So what's fulfilling for me? I had a misconception of what would be fulfilling for me. And when I came to that understanding, when I kind of made that inner breakthrough, it was so liberating. It felt so wonderful to think, actually, it's so true. Money is not the cause of my happiness. As long as I have enough work to maintain myself, I don't have to stress about these things. Whichever amount of money is meant to come to me in this life will come to me. And I don't need to worry about this. Let me worry about my spiritual practice, and also let me worry about my dharma more than money. Let me worry about my nature, what it is that's going to bring me satisfaction in my work. So that was a really nice breakthrough for me, and somewhat related to what you were just saying and what we're reading here.
Yes. There's a lot of contempt also around being like not well off, right? Like this feeling that others will hold you in contempt because of it. And just like for example,
not
when
cool
I go
enough.
they're not cool enough, not good enough.
Yeah.
When I for some years I was going to Cali, Colombia quite regularly. And like in India and South America, they have servants that just serve in the house who've been doing it for like, it could be like literally generations of family members serving a particular family in a house in Cali. And so, when you speak to any like a United States of America citizen, they would find that such work like appalling. But I was like, my experience of observing that is that these servants look mad happy. There's mad respect between servant and served in these houses mostly. They're practically like family. So much so that at least what I saw is that when anything happened to the servant, the family was like there to support them. Like even if it was like an emergency, paying bills, maybe their child needed some extra money for the hospital or something. I was like, there was like this sense that, yes, you're the servant, I'm the served, but there was no contempt in that relationship. And so the person who was the servant looked to me to be very much satisfied.
Mm.
And they were happy. Like that's what they do. And there was no problem with that. There was no like awkwardness about it. Like, oh my God, I'm a servant. I'm in such a low position. It was like, no, I'm a servant.
Stigmatize that kind of, even just even just being employed amongst certain circles is stigmatized. You got to be an entrepreneur.
Right. It's like, no,
you're working some people work at Starbucks. Those idiots work at Starbucks.
Dude, I'm one of those idiots, homie. You want to fight?
Yeah. It hurts, but I had to come to that realization. Maybe I'm not that money making, social networking, whatever it might be, but that's the message that I get, that we as a society in this modern world are drilled with. I just want to acknowledge we've had a question come in.
Okay.
On our YouTube, which is very nice. So Winklebird, it's a great name. I actually wanted to cover other things, and maybe we'll come back to it. But I'm love to acknowledge the questions that come in. A part of this conversation is always open to questions. It's an open conversation. So thank you, Winklebird, for asking a question. I just want to encourage anyone else, if you're listening and you have questions, engage. Feel free. We're here. We'd love to talk about it and work through those things. So the question is, how does one find their adhikar/nature /varna in this day and age?
Yeah, that's good luck. Good luck.
Krishna.
This is what I was mentioning, that this whole adhikar.
Sorry, Winklebird. Maybe that wasn't the answer you were looking for. No, but Jai's going to elaborate here.
I mean, this is what I meant, that adhikar topic had to be broken down a little bit more. Yeah, basically, the way that you hear it presented in the Gita, at least, is that there should be alignment between one's nature, known as swabhava, which means one's own nature, and one's like activity or work, known as swadharma. So when these two are in alignment, then basically you'll be a satisfied person, and you can work in a healthy way, meeting obligations to the social world while also making advancement internally. So problem comes if these two things aren't aligned, swabhava and swadharma. If there's misalignment, then you invite much suffering into your world because of that misalignment. So that's most of our generation. We don't know what is our nature. And so we don't know what we should be doing. So then we end up being easily selling into the idea of just being like successful in terms of finances, or in terms of becoming like an influencer. In other words, we look for the external criteria because we don't have an awareness of what our nature is and what we should be doing as a result of an awareness of that nature. So there's a lot of misalignment with these two, and therefore it's very hard to discover what's your adhikar. Because adhikar means, okay, I have this nature, then I have adhikar for this. All right, that is what Krishna is telling Arjuna. You have a kshatriya swabhava, so therefore you should do a kshatriya swadharma. Kshatriya means a warrior. The word kshatriya literally means one who protects from harm. It's a martial role in the society. So you have this martial swabhava, therefore you do martial work. Easy. Now, in the old world, at least the old world that we hear about in the Gita, parents, for starters, they married within their group, so to speak, their social group. So as I mentioned, in the old world, there was basically 4 distinct social groups. There are groups outside of these 4, but the mainstream culture was these 4 distinct social groups: an intellectual social group, martial social group, a agrarian or business social group, and then like a labor social group. And you were only basically, it was taboo to marry outside of your group. Now, that may seem like a mean or unfair imposition, but basically the idea is that you were thinking about the future. Each of these social groups are absolutely required for a healthy society. So they often give this image of a social body also, right? The intellect is the head, the martial group are the arms, and then you have the belly for the entrepreneurs and agrarian and then you have the legs for the laborers. So you want all parts of the body to be there, because that makes for the healthiest sort of social society. So knowing that your social group is providing this important role in the stabilizing and integrity of a society, the idea was that you married within your social group to produce more of the same type, to continue to do that work that is favorable for the integrity of the society. In other words, as far as my understanding is concerned, there was perhaps a little bit of a downplay of the let's marry because of love only, and more of a emphasis on, like, you have a duty to your society and you have a duty to your social community. And one of your main duties as a member of the society is to produce children of the same type that can continue to perform this particular role in relationship to the society that allows for its social integrity, right? So when you have parents who are part of the same social group, they have kids, they're going to have kids that are more or less likely going to be like them. And also everyone they see around them is also like that. Mm-hmm. So in other words, if you're an intellectual, there was a good chance that this doesn't mean that it happened in all cases. There's obviously always going to be exceptions to the rule, but it's not that the exception should then become the rule.
Right.
So the basic idea was that you were part of this social group. You had children with the whole idea of producing more of the same type. Everyone they saw around them was of that type, and they ended up doing that type of work. So it became very, like, more or less straightforward that my swabhava is this. My parents' swabhava was this. I also have the same swabhava. Therefore, my swadharma is this. It's clear. Now, again, there's a lot in such a system. There's a lot less social freedom. So I think such a system, like when we hear about such a thing, it sounds rather appalling or restrictive in nature, because it pretty much was restrictive in nature. But there is a trade-off. You have a clarity about these sorts of questions. Like, okay, this is my nature. This is what I'm supposed to be doing. It's clear. Now let's fast forward it to our contemporary times, where people, they marry usually with the love thing getting the emphasis, and the duty thing being completely like sidebar, if at all, even part of the discussion. It's like all about love, which is okay, cool. So, you love someone, they may be of a different social group, but love conquers all. Love can overcome anything. Those sorts of messages there. Okay, cool. So you have a nature and your wife has maybe a different nature, and then you produce children. So then the type of children that are produced from that union, at least in the Gita's language, is known as Varna Sankara, right? Then the word Varna Sankara means a mixture. Sankara means mixture, a mixture of Varna. It's not a pure Varna. It's a mixture of Varna. So perhaps, let's say you're intellectual and your wife is, let's say, an artist type, for example. This is just an example. So there's a mixture of Varna. So your kid is not like going to be purely intellectual, but he might be smart. And he's not going to be like purely artistic, but he's got, he can play a little guitar. So then what happens to this kid is that he may not feel himself fully a part of any one community. So then he wants to create his own side community or his side thing. He feels that he can't really be committed to anything because he doesn't really know his place in the world. This is called Varna Sankara. So that means there's going to be a little bit of confusion about his nature, in other words. What is the nature and what is the sort of work he should be doing? Now, you combine this Varna Sankara over many generations. Like I like to say, I've heard it said also by sadhus, that our generation of kids, we're Sankara. We're a mixture of a mixture. So obviously, we're pretty confused about our nature for this reason. And it becomes very difficult to identify what we should be doing if there's that confusion about our nature. And when you look at the world around you, which is a world, socially speaking, was to help give clarity, everyone around you is like mad confused, looking crazy and clowning. And so it becomes really difficult to discover in contemporary times what my nature might be, and therefore what I should be doing because of that particular nature.
This is a whole other discussion.
Yeah, it's a thing.
It's a whole thing that we could, yeah. It's a whole thing that we could get into.
That's why my answer was like, good luck.
I'm gonna I'm going to partially, because I could engage in so many things you said, but I'm going to partially sidebar that just for now. And also wanted to share just a brief thought with along the same lines of what you're saying about Winklebird. Again, I love that name. Just share a quick thought for myself, because I feel like to some degree I had a little breakthrough in this thing. It's tough, challenging, because we're sunker, like you said. We're a mixture of a mixture in terms of our internal setup, in terms of who we feel to be internally. It's we are all very mixtures, so it's challenging just inherently from the get-go. Never mind what we are bombarded with socially through media, advertising, marketing, etc. So it's for my breakthrough took 30 years. Realistically, maybe contemplation, more genuine contemplation, 7, 8 years, and then more focused energy in trying to understand myself better, 2 years of focused energy of quit my job, go traveling, focus my energy on spirituality, focus my energy on trying to seek other spiritual seekers, teachers, spiritual teachers, enlightenment to some degree, those who are, seeking association with those who are already enlightened, and a lot of discussion, a lot of sitting and reflecting, and some therapy, throw some therapy in there. We did couples counseling, a whole bunch of things. And eventually coming to the place where realizing that for example, for me, it was money is not my goal. That's not my swadharma. That's not my swabhav. That's not my thing in this life right now. Sometimes we have to painfully extract ourselves from the ideas that we've built up in our mind of what we think we want. It can be a painful extraction. For me, it was a painful extraction to then sit with ourselves and think, what is it really that we want? And you'll know that. Really, there's no one else who can tell you that. You got to sit with yourself and do the work. Maybe that.
I would like to add just quickly on a personal level also, because I've experienced this. If you find that you're good at something and it fulfills you, and when I say fulfill, it's like something you can always do at any time. You don't have to take a day off. Then there's probably you're close to what your nature might be and the work you should be doing.
Wow, there we go.
And I personally, I'm good at running my mouth. I'm decent at it. And I like to do that.
And let me give you some affirmation here, confirmation. I like to listen to you run your mouth, bro. So that's because you could like to do that and be terrible at it, and you could just be mad confused, but you're good at it. From an external feedback point, you're on the right track.
So that's how I discovered this might be my swadharma in this life. And in other words, it came from like the field of engagement, right? I was engaged. Yeah. And I discovered I'm kind of good at this. And it also fulfills me in a way that I don't have to take a break from it.
Teacher, talker, presenter.
Yeah. So like that, if you discover something like that, then you're probably in the right ballpark. You're probably somewhere in the right ballpark. And that's just like a practical thing. What I spoke earlier was just sort of the metaphysical difficulties of discovering that in this age. Right. But there's a practical thing. You're good at something, and if it fills you, then you're probably in the right. It comes from engagement in the field of activity.
Nice. Yes, Sidesh Kulkarni, I'm reading the messages. Thank you for your love and support. So, okay, so I was hoping I feel like we need to start moving toward the conclusion. There's no real time limit, actually. So there's no pressure, but I also want to respect your time. I want to respect the time of the listeners. So there were two things that I felt like you already mentioned, and just maybe highlight those a little more and to just take a little more time to look at that. So one of those was what's the full karma yoga picture? Because we've spoken a lot about yoga in action, but I don't feel like we've necessarily gone to the the icing on the cake of what karma yoga really means, which is then offering that your action. It's an offering. And that ties into my second point. What's real renunciation? So I act in the world, but I'm doing it without personal attachment to the results of my actions. Okay, so that's what I understand to be genuine karma yoga. Genuine karma yoga means that I get it. I have a psychophysical apparatus set up that requires me to engage in certain ways. I have to do the work, discover my swabhav, my internal setup, and then do the work, to realize what my work, figure out what my dharma, my action should be in this world. But then the defining point of karma yoga means that you don't then just go out and do that for yourself. That's still, you've missed the point. Great, you're still probably ahead of most if you've got this far, but real karma yoga, real activity designed to elevate us, to lead us to true, long-lasting, eternal happiness means that the final thing that we have to acknowledge is then we then offer this work to Krishna or to Allah or whatever you may call God, the divine. We call him Krishna or Radha Krishna, divine masculine, divine feminine. So maybe you can elaborate a little bit on that defining characteristic. Maybe I don't know if you agree with that, or if you did, you could elaborate a little on that.
Yeah, Krishna will get to that later on in the chapter. He doesn't get to it in the part that we were discussing today. Right now, he's just trying to make a case for doing karma, right? Because Arjuna is a little bit reluctant. So he wants to make a case for the viability of engagement with the external world. But he will get to that a little bit later.
Okay, fine.
And there are two forms of it also. Definitely one form is offering the result to God. And Krishna will actually mention that in 330 of this particular chapter. But it also technically actually counts as karma yoga when you do it just because it's your duty. Because you could do something in a dutiful way. You're not attached to it. You don't actually want a fruit from it, but you're supposed to do it. So you just do it because you're supposed to. It's, there's a set of rules that govern activity, and you accept those, and you act because you know you're supposed to do so. That is also counted as karma yoga, actually.
Okay.
Which would be interesting. So both ideas will definitely come up in this Gita. Of course, the way, like if you read different commentaries, they have different emphasis. And if you read like Bhagavad Gita as it is commentary, he basically says this is basically devotion. So you just, you do the work without desire for the fruit, and you give that fruit to God. So, and that element is there. That's definitely a type of karma yoga offering. But there's just also doing something because it's the right thing to do. Right thing here means that it's my duty to do it. And you perform without the attachment.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that, Jai. And you're right. I often, again, this comes into my desire to give everything in a single episode. Do justice to the book. Don't miss anything, but you're right. It does come. You just have to tune in to the following episodes to hear more. If you like what you've heard. Okay, fine. So then the final closing thing, because in just looking in chapter, so it's in text 6, chapter 3, text 6 in the purport. So, I'll just read the translation. One who restrains the senses of action, but whose mind dwells on sense objects, certainly deludes himself and is called a pretender. So it's talking about this idea that you can't withdraw from the world. The mind is always active. But the word I wanted to pick up on here was pretender. And the purport goes on to say, Srila Prabhupada goes on to elaborate. The purports are elaborations or explanations of the texts of the Gita. Again, I'm sure anyone listening understands this, but always, just in case people don't know, the texts of the Gita are Krishna and Arjuna engaging in conversation. Krishna's giving Arjuna this eternal wisdom. And the different copies of the Gita that we find are normally with commentaries on the Gita. So when he just mentioned, Jai just mentioned, we are reading from Bhagavad Gita as it is, which has the commentary of a great saint called Srila Prabhupada. This is the book. Fine. So the purport goes on, the commentary goes on to say, there are many pretenders who refuse to work in Krishna consciousness, but make a show of meditation while actually dwelling within the mind upon sense enjoyment. So I guess, and we are running kind of short on time, but the point that I wanted to pick up on here was pretenders and this idea that, again, just to drive it home, that there's a sincere way to pursue spiritual life. And then there's a false way to pursue spiritual life. And sometimes it can be hard to navigate those two. We think we're being sincere, but perhaps we're actually acting with false motives. And yeah, just to see, I don't know if that triggered anything for you. It was something I thought to raise before we wrapped up.
Yeah, so like I mentioned, 3.3 through 3.8 is like one argument. It's it's contained. The basic idea is Christians juxtapose qualification for Jnana Yoga and qualification for Karma Yoga side by side. And he wants to make a critique of these in favor of Karma Yoga. So then he's critiquing here the person who has accepted the Jnana Yoga path, but he doesn't have adhikar for that. So because he doesn't have adhikar for that path, he meditates on sense objects within himself while externally showing himself to be very renounced. So you fake. Just like, not to be heavy, but a lot of fake people in the religious community, I'm not talking about only our own, but I'm talking about like, Christians, they be getting caught with their hand in the cookie jar, if you know what I mean. And it's not
we
pretty.
See it everywhere. We see it everywhere.
So that's an example of being fake. Or mithyachaar, pretender is the word used there.
Yeah.
You're a pretender. You're showing yourself.
See, Jaya Jagannath is so scholarly. It's sad for me because I'm so not. But it's also just fantastic to listen to.
Different adhikar, right?
Different adhikar.
Yeah,
and it's true, and it's sad.
So this guy, he is taking a path of renunciation, but inside he thinking about some nasty stuff. And then inevitably he acts out on those nasty desires because he doesn't actually have adhikar for that renounced position. So that's what Krishna is trying to impress upon, you can say Arjuna, but really us through Arjuna, that you should act, again, going back to this idea, virtue is acting according to your adhikar, vice is doing the opposite. So this guy decided to do a renounced path, but he didn't have adhikar for that. Now he getting caught with his hand in cookie jar, and he jacking up the whole community because of it. So then the verses after that, Krishna will say, better you do some humble work and according to your adhikar, and from that position, try to make progress. So this is it's contained within this one line of thought, that be sincere, act according to your eligibility, and make progress from there. That is not to say that there's no one who has eligibility for renunciation, but then you should know what that eligibility is and see if you have such an eligibility. If you find yourself like preoccupied with the sensual world while showing yourself to be renounced, then you probably need to reconsider your adhikar in that particular instance and switch gears.
Dropping it like it's hot, Jai. Dropping it like it's hot.
So yeah, it's this sort of chapter is very nice because it explains a lot of the issues that we see come up, particularly in the religious world. A lot of them are connected to this particular theme in this first passage of the Gita, chapter 3.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jai. Thank you so much for joining me today. It was last minute. Like we said, Chintamani today woke up feeling really sick. Again, let's send Chintamani some positive energy, some love, some healing energy. Looking forward to having Chintamani back with us, but at the same time, feeling so grateful to Jai for jumping in and sharing his own wisdom, sharing his thoughts, sharing just so much scholarly aptitude. And I really took a lot away from today. I hope others did as well. And I don't know if there's any closing thoughts from Jai. I'll pass it to you in a sec if there is, but we always finish these episodes with a little bit of Kirtan, being that we are Kirtan London and we have a passion for Kirtan. So I'm going to do a short little bit of mantra meditation before we close out. Jai, any closing thoughts, words, things you want to share with our listeners?
Something to the effect of a pinch of honesty is better than a pound of inauthenticity. I don't know. I'm trying to think of a really cool one-liner. Something to that effect. A pinch of honesty is better than a pound of fakery.
You're onto something there. It was almost perfect.
Yeah, that fakery. I'm looking for a better word for that last. A pound of something.
Oh, but I like that though. I like the intention that behind that one-liner. Woof, powerful.
So that's kind of the theme that I take from this first passage of the Gita.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Jai. Okay, I'm gonna pull over my harmonium now and do a few minutes of chanting. So if there's anyone still listening, thank you to those who have been joining. I like the comment that came in. Winklebird appreciated the answers, and Robert said, "Get your chit together," which is a phrase that Jai, as we know, Jai loves. Chat chit. A pound of rules and regulations. There's a few more. Robert's commenting again. Okay. Let me see if I can get my microphone hooked up in such a way to play and sing at the same time. Turn on original sound. Hari Bol. I'm going to sing. There is a very, very beautiful mantra which is sung by one of our great saints and divine incarnations known as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who founded in the modern world the Sankirtan or this Kirtan movement, and he sings a very wonderful, beautiful prayer called Krishna Keshava. So I'm going to sing that now for a few minutes. Give a little context to this. It's my understanding, at least, is that it's a prayer. He was singing it as he was walking through the forests of South India, where there were wild animals and dacoits and so many dangerous things there. And it was in essence, a call for protection whilst he was walking through that place. And so, if you do want to sit with this, go inside and enter that sacred space with me whilst we're doing the chanting, then you can take on a little bit of that mentality, that mood, a call to the divine, calling out with our heart for protection, I guess in whatever way that means to you. You can hear that okay, Jai? Krishna Keshava, Krishna Keshava, Krishna Keshava, Pahimam. Krishna Keshava, Krishna Keshava, Krishna Keshava, Pahimam. Rama Raghava, Rama Raghava, Rama Raghava, Rakshamam. Rama Raghava, Rama Raghava, Rama Raghava, Rakshamam. Krishna Keshava, Keshava, Krishna Keshava, Krishna Keshava, Pahimam. Krishna Keshava, Krishna Keshava, Krishna Keshava, Pahimam. Rama Raghava, Rama Raghava, Rama Raghava, Rakshamam. Rama Raghava, Rama Raghava, Rama Raghava, Rakshamam. Rama Raghava, Rama Raghava, Rama Raghava, Rakshamam. Krishna Keshava, Krishna Keshava, Krishna Keshava, Pahimam. I was just reflecting that it's a prayer for protection, and you can look at that in many ways. What does protection mean? And I was thinking that we can ask to be protected from this hypocrisy mentality. Let me turn off my original sound. Be protected from this pretender tendency in anything that we do. At least that's one way to look at this protection.
There we go. There we have it. A pinch of honesty is better than a pound of pretense. There we go.
Ooh, Krishna. Oof, oof.
That was one there.
Ooh, wow. You came up with that right now?
Well, you were saying there's protection from pretending. Then I said that's the word. That would be a good fit here.
Oh, wow. Feels like a moment. Anyway, thank you again, Jai. Really, thank you so much for being here, sitting in, joining us. It was
Thank
really
you for having me.
It was really wonderful. Maybe we'll get you back again at some point, perhaps with Chintamani here as well.
Okie dokie, sounds great.
Yeah, so yeah, see, I had to throw that in there just in front of everyone, pin you down. Jai, thank you so much yourself, Jai. Thank you to those wonderful listeners for being present with us live. Again, we're doing this offering to go deeper into the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita. It's a journey to joy for all of us involved. It's not that those involved in presenting this podcast are teachers per se, telling you what you should be doing. We're also journey seekers on this path. So it's for us and it's for everyone. And it's a real pleasure. And I hope to see you all. Oh, where I was going with that was, so please come and join us. Come and join us, and then we can engage together. We can ask questions. You can join us live in the Zoom room as well. So we will be promoting the Ticket Tailor link will be to join us here in the Zoom room. And then, at the end of the podcast, whether you've asked questions live or not, we can always talk and engage and maybe churn things a little more. Obviously, we're live on YouTube as well. So come and join us. Come and join us for this journey to joy. And peace out.
Later.
All right. Thank you, Jai. Thank you, everyone. I'm gonna end the live. I'm gonna stop the live. Let me stop the recording.